Gregory Pappy Boyington entered the world on a crisp December day in 1912, in the small town of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Born of Sioux and Irish heritage, he carried a unique blend of cultures that would shape his character in ways both subtle and profound. From an early age, Gregory was captivated by the skies. While other children played in the fields or followed the predictable rhythms of small-town life, he would spend hours gazing upward, mesmerized by the graceful arcs of airplanes tracing paths across the clouds, the roar of engines, the thrill of speed, and the promise of adventure sparked something in him that ordinary childhood games could never match. Even as his fascination with flight went beyond mere admiration. He absorbed every story of daring aviators from the First World War, reading accounts of their courage and audacity, imagining himself in the cockpit, facing the unknown with only skill, instinct, and determination to guide him. Flying was not just a dream for Boyington, it was a calling. His eyes, wide with wonder, reflected the boundless skies he longed to conquer, and his imagination charted courses through battles he would one day face for real. Yet, Gregory was far from ordinary. From an early age, he displayed a fiery spirit and a restless energy that set him apart from his peers. He was fearless in confrontation, quick to challenge injustice, and unafraid to stand his ground, even when it meant getting into trouble. Teachers, neighbors, and friends alike noted his intensity, an intensity that would later define both his heroism and his controversies. He was a boy who thrived on challenges, who sought adventure not just in the air but in life itself. This combination of daring and defiance would become a hallmark of Boyington's later years. It would propel him to extraordinary heights as a fighter pilot, yet also lead him into conflicts with those around him. But in these early moments, long before the roar of combat engines and the glare of medals, Gregory's love for flight was pure and untainted. It was a seed of destiny, planting within him the courage, curiosity, and audacity that would later make him both a legend and a subject of debate. As we explore the life of Gregory Pappy Boyington, we will see how this restless spirit carried him across the globe, from daring missions over enemy territory to the harrowing experiences of a prisoner of war. His story is one of courage, controversy, and complexity, a tale that challenges our understanding of heroism itself. If you are fascinated by extraordinary stories of bravery and human complexity, do not forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode of Forgotten History. Join us as we uncover the life of one of World War II's most iconic and controversial fighter pilots, and dive deep into the skies, battles, and choices that made Gregory Pappy Boyington a legend and a puzzle to this very day. From the very beginning, Gregory Pappy Boyington's life was marked by a restless energy that set him apart from those around him, and his fascination with flight was only one part of a personality that could be as volatile as it was magnetic. While many children of his age in Coeur d'Alene were content to follow the quiet rhythm of small-town life, Gregory seemed drawn to challenge, to confrontation, and to testing boundaries, a trait that would follow him well into adulthood. Even as he could not resist a fight if he perceived an injustice or if someone provoked him. And while he maintained that he was never a bully, the intensity of his presence often left others wary. There was a sense about him that he lived on the edge, that life was not merely to be endured but to be seized, questioned, and sometimes shaken to its core. His courage was undeniable, yet it came hand in hand with a kind of impulsiveness that made him unpredictable. And those who crossed paths with him soon learned that Boyington was a man who would not back down, no matter the consequences. As he grew older, this combative streak did not diminish. Rather, it evolved and intertwined with his burgeoning love for the skies. In schoolyards and small-town streets, he had honed his instinct for confrontation, developing a confidence that allowed him to face opposition without hesitation. and that same instinct later translated into his approach to aerial combat. In the cockpit, that fearless determination could mean the difference between life and death, allowing him to maneuver through dogfights with a blend of skill, daring, and audacity that few could match. Yet the same traits that made him a natural leader and a daring pilot also caused tension with peers and authority figures alike. He had a tendency to challenge orders, to act on impulse, and to make enemies as easily as he made allies. And the line between bravery and recklessness often blurred in his actions. It was a duality that defined him, a man capable of extraordinary courage, yet equally capable of creating conflict where none needed to exist. His time with the American volunteer group, the Flying Tigers, would serve as an early testing ground for this blend of brilliance and volatility. Stationed in China, Boyington was tasked with aiding the Chinese forces against Japanese expansion, and the dangerous missions required not only skill but also discipline, teamwork, and a clear head in combat. While Boyington's natural ability as a pilot was undeniable, his combative nature sometimes interfered with operations. There were incidents of flying under the influence, accidents on the ground, and tensions with fellow pilots who found his behavior both challenging and unpredictable. In one notable case, he accidentally shot down a friendly aircraft, an event that might have ended much more tragically, if not for the quick intervention of a fellow pilot who confronted him directly. These moments highlight how his fiery personality could both propel him to heroic feats and simultaneously jeopardize the very missions that depended on precision and trust. Boyington's personality extended beyond the battlefield, coloring his interactions in every aspect of life. He had a way of drawing people in, of commanding attention with his confidence, his humor, and a sense of adventure that was contagious. Yet that same magnetism often carried a hint of danger. At social gatherings, in officers' clubs, and later in military unions, his presence could dominate a room, creating both admiration and resentment. Friends remembered him as inspiring, someone who could push others to achieve more than they thought possible, while detractors viewed him as self-centered or unpredictable, a man who thrived on chaos as much as he did on success. The stories of his life are filled with episodes that illustrate this tension, moments when his courage shone brilliantly, and moments when his recklessness created strain and controversy. It is precisely this blend of daring, charisma, and volatility that made Boyington such a compelling figure, a man whose legend would grow far beyond the simple tally of victories in the air. Even as he rose to command the Black Sheep Squadron, these traits remained central to his identity. Leading WWII 214 required not only tactical skill but also the ability to manage a diverse group of pilots, each with their own personalities and experiences. Boyington's natural combative edge sometimes clashed with the expectations of military hierarchy, but it also inspired his squadron to perform feats that would become legendary. His insistence on bold maneuvers, calculated risks, and unorthodox strategies often paid off in victories that cemented the squadron's reputation. Yet behind the success lay the same unpredictable temperament that had defined him from childhood. Loyalty, courage, and brilliance existed alongside impulsiveness, stubbornness, and occasional arrogance, creating a man whose life could never be reduced to a simple narrative of heroism or failure. Boyington's reputation among his peers reflected this complexity. While some lauded his leadership, his bravery, and his ability to inspire, others found his behavior difficult, his judgments questionable, and his actions at times self-serving. It was a tension that followed him into captivity during his time as a prisoner of war, where his self-preservation instincts and combative personality continued to create divisions among those around him. Yet even in these moments, the same qualities that made him polarizing also kept him alive, allowing him to endure circumstances that might have crushed a less resourceful or less audacious individual. In examining Boyington's early personality and the combative, rebellious nature that defined him, we begin to understand the foundation of a man who would go on to achieve fame, controversy, and a complex legacy. His story challenges simplistic notions of heroism, illustrating that courage and character are not always aligned, and that extraordinary ability can coexist with flaws as vivid as the victories themselves. It is this tension, the coexistence of brilliance and volatility, daring and recklessness, inspiration and conflict, that makes Gregory "Pappy" Boyington a figure worth remembering, a man whose life continues to provoke admiration, debate, and fascination even decades after the guns fell silent. By the time Gregory "Pappy" Boyington reached adulthood, his passion for flight had matured into a purposeful drive that carried him far beyond the quiet streets of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. He sought adventure not merely as a thrill but as a calling, a chance to test his skills, courage, and wits against challenges that few could even imagine. This relentless pursuit led him to the American Volunteer Group, better known to the world as the Flying Tigers, a unit that would etch its name into the annals of history even before the United States formally entered World War II. Stationed in China under the command of Claire Chennault, the AVG represented not only a tactical alliance but also a crucible for Boyington's talents, temperament, and increasingly complex persona. It was here, amid the humidity of foreign airfields and the distant roar of Japanese fighters, that the threads of his youthful audacity and combative nature would be tested on a global stage, forcing him to confront the realities of warfare far beyond the safety of childhood dreams. The Flying Tigers were a unique assembly of American pilots, each drawn by the allure of adventure, the promise of pay, or a commitment to an allied cause that the U.S. government had not yet officially sanctioned. Boyington's arrival in this motley group was marked by both opportunity and friction. He brought with him not only an extraordinary aptitude for flying but also a reputation that preceded him, a reputation colored by impulsiveness, a penchant for confrontation, and a drive to assert his own sense of justice. In the delicate ecosystem of the AVG, these qualities proved both advantageous and problematic. In the cockpit, his daring maneuvers and sharp reflexes could turn the tide of an engagement, earning him victories against a formidable enemy. Yet on the ground, his temperament sometimes strained relationships with fellow pilots who valued discipline, coordination, and trust above all else. It was a delicate balance between brilliance and recklessness, and Boyington navigated it in his own unorthodox way, often leaving a trail of admiration and exasperation in equal measure. Under Chennault's watchful eye, Boyington learned the unforgiving dynamics of air combat and the vital importance of teamwork. Even as he tested the limits of tolerance and protocol, the commander recognized Boyington's raw talent but also noted his proclivity for bending rules, pushing boundaries, and occasionally defying orders in ways that flirted with disaster. In one notable instance, Boyington's aggressive flying led to a near miss with a fellow pilot, an accident that could have had dire consequences. Rather than shy away from responsibility, he faced the aftermath with a combination of candor and defiance, acknowledging the error while also challenging those who questioned his methods. This dynamic, exhilarating in its audacity, unnerving in its unpredictability, came to define his tenure with the AVG, demonstrating how a man capable of extraordinary feats in the air could simultaneously unsettle those who flew alongside him. The missions themselves were fraught with danger, testing not only skill but resilience, endurance, and judgment under pressure. Flying over the rugged landscapes of China, Boyington encountered enemy aircraft, anti-aircraft fire, and the ever-present threat of mechanical failure in a theater far removed from the logistical comforts of home. It was in these high-stakes moments that his daring nature found its fullest expression. Accounts from this period reveal a man who could pivot instantly from the thrill of a dogfight to the cold calculation necessary to survive. A man whose instincts often bordered on audacious improvisation, while his peers sometimes questioned the wisdom of his choices. Few could deny the effectiveness of his results, and his victories, whether fully confirmed or partially claimed, contributed to the growing legend of both Boyington and the Flying Tigers as a formidable force against a determined adversary. Yet life in the AG was not defined solely by air battles. The daily reality of serving in a foreign land, under a command structure that demanded both respect and adherence, required social acumen, diplomacy, and an awareness of one's own limitations, areas where Boyington's combative tendencies could collide with necessity. Interactions with fellow pilots, local personnel, and the broader chain of command tested his ability to navigate complex social terrain. Incidents of conflict were not uncommon, and his fiery temperament sometimes escalated situations that might have been resolved with tact or patience. Still, within this crucible, Boyington honed a critical lesson: that raw talent, while extraordinary, must be tempered with strategy, awareness, and, at times, restraint. The experience of the AVG would not only sharpen his skills as a pilot but also illuminate the contours of his character, revealing both strengths and flaws that would follow him throughout his military career. Amid the chaos of combat and the tensions of interpersonal dynamics, Boyington also had to contend with the realities of war that extended beyond aerial engagements. Supply shortages, unpredictable weather, and the ever-present uncertainty of survival shaped each mission and decision, forcing him to adapt rapidly and innovate under pressure. These conditions fostered a kind of resourcefulness and resilience that became integral to his identity as a fighter pilot. At the same time, the same conditions highlighted the consequences of impulsiveness, showing that even a pilot of exceptional skill could find himself in jeopardy if his judgment wavered. It was a constant interplay between courage and caution, audacity and prudence, that defined his tenure with the Flying Tigers and laid the groundwork for the legendary and often controversial status he would carry into his later years with the Black Sheep Squadron. Through it all, Boyington's time in China with the AG solidified the duality that would mark his legacy: a man capable of extraordinary heroism in the air and complex, often challenging behavior on the ground. His relationship with Chenault was emblematic of this tension, one of mutual recognition of talent, tempered by the need to monitor and mitigate the risks inherent in his temperament. It was a formative period, exposing him to both the exhilaration of combat and the burden of leadership in extreme circumstances, teaching lessons in skill, strategy, and the consequences of personal choices that would echo throughout his life. By the time he would leave the Flying Tigers and rejoin the U.S. Marines, Boyington had been forged in the fire of international conflict, shaped by adversity, and defined by a paradoxical blend of daring, recklessness, and undeniable courage that would make him one of World War II's most captivating and debated figures. Gregory Pappy Boyington's time with the Flying Tigers in China revealed not only his prodigious skill as a pilot, but also the darker, more impulsive side of his character, a side that would follow him throughout his military career and color the perceptions of those around him for decades to come. While his audacity in the air often bordered on brilliance, it was inseparable from a streak of recklessness that could, and frequently did, have dangerous consequences. Boyington was known among his peers for a tendency to indulge in alcohol even during periods when such behavior carried risk, and this reckless indulgence often spilled over into the cockpit, creating situations that were tense, unpredictable, and, at times, outright perilous. Tales from fellow pilots recall moments when he would take to the skies with a level of inebriation that defied logic, maneuvering his aircraft with a combination of daring instinct and sheer bravado that simultaneously impressed and alarmed those around him, leaving a trail of both awe and exasperation in his wake. The consequences of these flights were not always minor. Accidents occurred, including crashes during takeoff and collisions with ground equipment. Incidents that could have been avoided with greater discipline or caution. In one instance, Boyington famously damaged a water truck while attempting to execute a daring maneuver on the airfield. A seemingly reckless act that illustrated both his audacity and his disregard for convention. Such episodes, while often recounted with humor or incredulity by those who survived alongside him, created palpable tension within the unit, forcing commanders like Claire Chennault to monitor his behavior closely and set strict limitations on his alcohol consumption during official events and combat operations. This supervision was necessary not out of mistrust of his abilities, for Boyington was undeniably skilled, but out of concern for the safety of both himself and those who flew alongside him, highlighting the fine line he walked between heroism and hazard. Despite these challenges, Boyington's impulsive behavior did not diminish his contributions to the squadron. In fact, his fearless approach to aerial combat, even when fueled by a measure of recklessness, often yielded results that could not be ignored. However, the tension between his extraordinary skill and his unpredictable conduct created a complex dynamic among the pilots of the AG. Some admired him for his courage and capability, recognizing that his instinctive talent could save lives and turn the tide of engagements, while others distrusted him, concerned that a single lapse in judgment could jeopardize not only missions but the lives of the men around him. This dichotomy between admiration and anxiety, or an apprehension, came to define much of Boyington's professional relationships, underscoring the paradox of a man who could be both indispensable and disruptive, heroic and hazardous, often within the span of a single sortie. The culture of the Flying Tigers itself, operating in foreign territory and engaged in missions that were inherently dangerous, amplified the impact of Boyington's conduct. Every flight carried the possibility of encountering enemy aircraft, anti-aircraft fire, or mechanical failure, and each error, however small, had the potential for catastrophic consequences. That Boyington navigated these conditions, sometimes while under the influence, is a testament to his raw talent and instinct. Yet it also reveals a degree of hubris and defiance that complicated his relationships with fellow pilots and commanders alike. Officers like Chennault recognized the necessity of his abilities, but were constantly aware of the precarious balance required to keep him effective, while mitigating the risks inherent in his behavior. It was a careful dance of oversight, intervention, and occasional reprimand, a dynamic that highlighted both the strengths and vulnerabilities of a pilot whose personality was as commanding as his skill. Incidents of inebriated flight also extended to interactions with other pilots in combat and in daily life, creating a ripple effect of tension and, occasionally, conflict. On one occasion, Boyington inadvertently engaged a friendly aircraft, a near-tragic misunderstanding that could have escalated into disaster had it not been for the swift intervention of a fellow pilot. These moments, while often recounted with a sense of incredulous amusement by historians and contemporaries, also illustrate the very real dangers that accompanied his impulsive tendencies. They underscore a reality in which talent alone could not guarantee safety or success, and where personality and temperament became as critical to survival as skill and strategy. The duality of Boyington's nature, brilliant yet volatile, fearless yet unpredictable, was on full display in these incidents, shaping both his reputation and the legend that would follow him long after the war. Beyond the air, Boyington's behavior influenced his standing among his peers in social and professional contexts. His charisma, confidence, and larger-than-life persona drew attention and commanded respect. Yet his recklessness and occasional disregard for rules created friction and earned the cautionary regard of colleagues who had to navigate both his brilliance and his volatility. Accounts from veterans suggest that his impulsive decisions, particularly those influenced by alcohol, often left others holding the consequences of his actions, whether in the form of additional risk during missions, administrative headaches, or interpersonal conflicts that required resolution. In this way, his talent was inseparable from his temperament. The very qualities that elevated him to legendary status in the air simultaneously complicated his relationships and challenged the cohesion of the units in which he served. Ultimately, these episodes of reckless flight and confrontational behavior provide a window into the paradoxical nature of Gregory Pappy Boyington. They reveal a man of exceptional courage, technical skill, and daring ingenuity, capable of feats that inspired admiration and historical recognition, yet equally a man whose impulsiveness, indulgence, and defiance of convention created strain, risk, and controversy. This duality between brilliance and recklessness, heroism and hazard would continue to shape his career in the use Marines and later influence his legacy in both popular culture and historical record. It is within this tension that the legend of Boyington takes shape, a narrative where victories in the sky coexist with personal flaws on the ground, painting a portrait of a figure whose life defies simple categorization and whose story remains as compelling and complex as the man himself. Amid the chaos of aerial combat over China, Gregory Pappy Boyington developed a reputation as a daring and aggressive fighter pilot, one whose audacity often seemed boundless and whose record of aerial victories became a topic of both admiration and controversy. Boyington himself claimed 6 confirmed kills during his tenure with the American Volunteer Group, a figure that, at first glance, reinforced his growing legend among fellow pilots and the public alike. The reality, however, as later verified by official records, was more complicated. The WWII documentation credited him with only 3 confirmed victories and a shared kill, a discrepancy that would cast a shadow over his legacy and fuel debates among historians and veterans for decades to come. This divergence between personal claims and formal records did not merely reflect a matter of arithmetic. It symbolized the complex interplay of perception, ego, and memory that often surrounds figures of exceptional ability and magnetic personality, particularly those whose lives intersect with both heroism and controversy. The discrepancy between Boyington's claims and official verification was influenced by a combination of circumstances inherent to the chaotic nature of wartime aviation and by his own tendency to embellish or assert accomplishments in ways that amplified his personal legend. In the heat of dogfights, pilots faced rapid and disorienting conditions. Enemy aircraft moved unpredictably. Missions were conducted across vast and often unfamiliar terrain, and confirmation of kills relied on a patchwork of eyewitness accounts, radio reports, and post-mission debriefings that were, at best, approximate. In such an environment, the difference between a confirmed kill and a claimed victory could be a matter of visibility, timing, or the interpretation of events unfolding in split seconds above hostile skies. Boyington, whose confidence and assertiveness often bordered on bravado, naturally reported his achievements with a certainty that sometimes exceeded the cautious conclusions drawn by squadron record keepers, leading to tensions between perception and official recognition. Yet this discrepancy was about more than paperwork or the limitations of wartime record keeping. It touched on the very essence of Boyington's character and the way he navigated the world around him. He was a man accustomed to commanding attention, to asserting his narrative, and to framing his experiences in ways that highlighted his daring, skill, and impact. For Boyington, claiming 6 victories was not merely an act of exaggeration, but a reflection of his self-image and the persona he wished to project, both to his peers and to the wider world, in a unit populated by men equally skilled and often equally audacious. The assertion of superiority, whether entirely accurate or slightly inflated, became part of the social and professional dynamics that shaped interactions, loyalties, and rivalries within the WWII. Some fellow pilots accepted his claims with a mixture of amusement and skepticism, while others quietly questioned the gap between his reports and the hard evidence. A tension that would continue to shadow his reputation even as he moved on to lead the Black Sheep Squadron. The issue of credited victories also reveals the broader pressures of recognition and reputation in wartime aviation, particularly in an era when media coverage, morale, and public perception intertwined with personal valor. Pilots like Boyington were not only measured by their technical skill or tactical acumen, but also by the stories that circulated about them, stories that could inspire recruitment, bolster morale among allies, and shape the myths of the war effort. Boyington's confidence in claiming 6 kills, whether entirely substantiated or not, fit neatly into a narrative of heroic daring and relentless courage. A narrative that would later be amplified by popular culture and the television dramatizations of his exploits. In this sense, his personal recounting of victories served a dual purpose. It reinforced his own self-conception as an elite and fearless pilot, while simultaneously feeding into a broader cultural appetite for tales of individual heroism in the face of overwhelming odds. The discrepancy also had practical consequences within the ranks of the AV, influencing how other pilots perceived him and how leadership evaluated his contributions. Some of his colleagues, aware of the more conservative official tally, viewed his claims with quiet frustration, particularly those who had flown alongside him and witnessed both his brilliance and his lapses in judgment. These pilots understood that while Boyington's skill in the air was formidable, the line between genuine achievement and perceived embellishment could strain trust and complicate the camaraderie essential to effective squadron operations. At the same time, commanders like Claire Chennault had to navigate these perceptions carefully, balancing the need to maintain morale, acknowledge genuine accomplishments, and enforce discipline, all while managing the idiosyncratic personalities that made up the AG. Boyington's assertiveness in reporting his victories was emblematic of this tension, reflecting both the challenges of leadership and the complexity of heroism in the theater of war. Ultimately, the narrative of Boyington's claimed 6 victories versus the officially credited 3.5 underscores the multifaceted nature of his life and legacy. It illuminates the interplay between skill, ego, perception, and documentation that defines not only his story but the broader experience of wartime aviation, where the immediacy of action and the limits of verification often collided with the human desire for recognition and remembrance. The tension between what he claimed and what was officially recorded invites reflection on the nature of heroism itself, challenging simplistic notions of accomplishment and prompting questions about how history remembers individuals whose lives straddle the line between extraordinary achievement and human imperfection. In examining this episode, we gain a deeper understanding of Boyington as both a pilot and a person, a man whose audacity, skill, and determination propelled him to feats few could match, yet whose desire for recognition and narrative control sometimes outpaced the cautious verification of official records. The story of his victories, claimed and confirmed, is thus inseparable from the broader tapestry of his life, a life defined by daring, contradiction, and a relentless pursuit of personal and professional identity in circumstances that demanded both courage and accountability. It is within this nuanced interplay that the legend of Gregory Pappy Boyington finds its complexity. A story that challenges us to consider not just the victories themselves, but the man behind them, and the ways in which memory, record, and narrative intersect to shape the history we inherit. After the turbulence of his tenure with the American Volunteer Group, Gregory Pappy Boyington faced a pivotal crossroads in his military career, one that would test both his resilience and his unwavering determination to carve out a path defined by autonomy and leadership rather than conformity. Having left the AG under circumstances colored by disputes over pay, personality conflicts, and lingering accusations of recklessness, Boyington was poised to re-enter the formal structures of the U.S. military. Yet the transition was anything but straightforward. The Army Air Forces extended the offer of absorption, a path that promised stability but demanded adherence to protocols and hierarchies that Boyington had long found constraining. For a man whose career had been shaped as much by audacity and initiative as by skill in the skis, the prospect of being absorbed into a system where he would follow orders rather than set them was unpalatable. It was a moment that would require not just strategic thinking but a deep understanding of his own ambitions and the political acumen necessary to navigate the rigid military bureaucracy of the era. Boyington's approach to this dilemma was characteristically bold. Rather than acquiesce to the Army's plans, he drafted a letter to the Commandant of the Marine Corps, requesting reinstatement to his previous commission and rank. This was not a mere administrative maneuver. It was a deliberate assertion of agency, a declaration that he intended to define the terms of his service on his own terms. By appealing directly to the highest levels of the Marine Corps hierarchy, Boyington bypassed the intermediaries who might have stymied his ambitions, demonstrating the same initiative and tenacity that had propelled him through the skies of China. His request was ultimately approved, and he rejoined the Marines with the rank of Major, a position that not only recognized his prior achievements, but also positioned him to exercise leadership in a manner consistent with his vision of military service. This reinstatement marked a turning point in Boyington's career, one in which he could pivot from being a member of a unit to shaping and commanding one. It was a transition from reactive to proactive engagement, from following orders to crafting strategy, from surviving missions to orchestrating them. For Boyington, leadership was not merely a formal title. It was an extension of his personality, an arena in which his talents, instincts, and boldness could coalesce into tangible results. It was also an opportunity to reconcile the contradictions of his reputation, to channel his audacity and propensity for risk into structured command, and to build a unit that reflected both his ideals and his approach to warfare. The lesson was clear to him. Rather than conform to existing frameworks, he would construct his own, molding personnel, tactics, and morale into a cohesive force that could achieve distinction even amid the uncertainties of global conflict. The process of forming a squadron under these conditions was neither simple nor conventional. Boyington scoured the ranks for pilots who could complement his vision, seeking individuals with skill, resilience, and the ability to adapt quickly to the rigors of combat. Not all recruits were experienced fighter pilots. Some came from diverse military backgrounds, and part of Boyington's challenge and innovation was in transforming them into a unit capable of executing complex aerial operations. His leadership style was immersive and intensely personal. He led by example, demonstrating daring in combat that inspired confidence while demanding discipline in ways that reinforced both cohesion and operational effectiveness. The unit he assembled, later known as WWII 214 or the Black Sheep Squadron, became a reflection of his philosophy, a testament to the notion that leadership was as much about vision and selection as it was about personal skill or rank. Boyington's reinstatement also represented a symbolic victory over institutional constraints that he had long resisted. By asserting his preference to serve as a Marine major rather than be subsumed into the Army Air Forces, he underscored a career-long pattern of autonomy, determination, and selective engagement with authority. This choice was emblematic of his character, a man who valued opportunity, recognition, and responsibility on his own terms, who was unwilling to be relegated to the role of a follower when his instincts and abilities positioned him to lead. Within the Marine Corps, this autonomy allowed him to establish operational priorities, develop tactical innovations, and cultivate a unit identity that was distinct, daring, and highly effective, all while navigating the administrative and interpersonal challenges inherent to wartime command. The broader context of Boyington's leadership highlights the interplay between personal ambition and institutional necessity, between individual skill and collective success. His ability to avoid absorption into the army was more than a bureaucratic victory. It was a strategic maneuver that allowed him to shape the course of his own narrative and the performance of the men under his command. It demonstrated a nuanced understanding of military politics, an appreciation for timing and leverage, and an instinct for seizing opportunities that aligned with his personal and professional objectives. In re-establishing himself within the Marine Corps as a major, Boyington not only reclaimed a formal position of authority, but also positioned himself to leave a lasting impact on the air war in the Pacific, a legacy that would intertwine acts of courage, tactical brilliance, and the complexities of a man whose life and career defied simple categorization. Rejoining the Marines was thus more than a return. It was a transformation, a deliberate move from reactive survival to proactive leadership. It marked the beginning of a phase in Boyington's life in which his boldness, experience, and strategic thinking could converge into a unit capable of achieving renown against formidable odds. By choosing to lead rather than follow, he demonstrated the core principle that would define both his success and his legend, that mastery of the skies required not just skill, but vision, initiative, and the courage to claim one's place in history, even when the path to it was fraught with conflict, controversy, and the persistent demands of leadership under fire. In this way, the reinstatement of Gregory "Pappy" Boyington as a Marine Major became a turning point, setting the stage for the rise of the Black Sheep Squadron and cementing a legacy that would be remembered for both its audacity and its profound complexity. Once reinstated as a Marine Major, Gregory "Pappy" Boyington embarked on one of the most defining chapters of his career, the creation and leadership of WWII 214, a squadron that would come to be known as the Black Sheep. The formation of this unit was a bold and unconventional undertaking, reflecting Boyington's penchant for risk, his sharp eye for talent, and his unrelenting desire to operate on his own terms, rather than seeking out only seasoned fighter pilots. He scoured the ranks for a mix of personnel, blending experienced aviators with individuals who possessed raw potential, diverse backgrounds, and the willingness to adapt to the rigors of aerial combat in the Pacific theater. This eclectic assembly of men became the foundation of a unit that would defy expectations, demonstrating that a carefully curated team of determined and skilled individuals could achieve extraordinary results even under the most challenging conditions. Boyington's approach to building the Black Sheep Squadron was as much about character and compatibility as it was about technical skill. He understood that the intensity of war demanded cohesion, trust, and a shared sense of purpose, qualities that could not be measured solely by flight hours or confirmed kills. Assembling a squadron from such a wide variety of pilots required a careful balancing act. Some men needed intensive training to bring them up to the demands of fighter operations, while others had to be guided to channel their natural talents into strategic effectiveness. Boyington immersed himself in this process, not as a distant commander but as an active mentor, instructor, and sometimes provocateur, challenging his men to push beyond perceived limitations and fostering a culture of ingenuity and adaptability. His leadership style was direct and personal, blending audacity with discipline, and instilling in his squadron a belief that they could excel not through conformity, but through calculated risk-taking, courage, and mutual support. The Black Sheep Squadron quickly earned a reputation for daring operations and impressive results, a reflection of both Boyington's strategic vision and the unique composition of the unit. They operated in the Pacific with a flexibility and aggressiveness that distinguished them from more conventional squadrons, engaging in missions that demanded quick thinking, precise coordination, and unyielding bravery. Boyington himself led from the front, demonstrating skill, tenacity, and fearlessness that inspired confidence and loyalty among his men. even as his unpredictable temperament and history of recklessness continued to complicate interpersonal dynamics. The squadron's identity was forged not only through training and combat, but also through a shared narrative of overcoming adversity, uniting disparate individuals into a cohesive and formidable fighting force whose successes were measured both in victories in the sky and in the resilience of the men who comprised it. Over the course of their operations, WWII 214 achieved remarkable results, with Boyington personally credited with numerous victories and the squadron as a whole demonstrating tactical proficiency that cemented their reputation in the annals of Marine Corps aviation. Under his leadership, the Black Sheep claimed 22 aerial victories, testament to their effectiveness, ingenuity, and the high-risk, high-reward approach that Boyington championed. These achievements were not mere statistics. They reflected a series of missions in which strategy, skill, and courage intersected, often under intense pressure and in hostile environments where every decision could mean the difference between life and death. The squadron's performance highlighted Boyington's ability to harness individual talent and focus it toward collective success, translating a group of diverse and sometimes unconventional pilots into a disciplined, cohesive, and highly effective fighting unit. The story of WWII 214 also illustrates the intricate interplay between leadership style, unit composition, and operational success. Boyington's selection of pilots, emphasis on adaptability, and insistence on leading from the front fostered a culture of accountability and initiative, encouraging men to take calculated risks and develop confidence in their own abilities while maintaining cohesion and shared purpose. Each mission served as a crucible, testing both individual skill and the strength of the unit's collective dynamics. And each success reinforced the sense of identity and pride that defined the Black Sheep. Through these experiences, the squadron not only accumulated victories but also cultivated a legacy of innovation, resilience, and daring that would become a hallmark of Boyington's leadership and a defining chapter in Marine Corps aviation history. Beyond tactical accomplishments, the formation and success of WWII 214 underscore the complex character of Boyington himself. His audacity, decisiveness, and ability to inspire were balanced by volatility, a history of recklessness, and interpersonal friction, creating a leadership style that was at once magnetic and challenging. Pilots under his command experienced the full spectrum of these traits, moments of inspiration and exhilaration alongside episodes of tension and uncertainty. Yet it was precisely this combination that produced results. The squadron thrived not despite Boyington's idiosyncrasies, but in part because of the bold, sometimes unpredictable, approach that he brought to command. His ability to channel the energy and diversity of his unit into coherent, effective operations was a defining feature of his tenure, and it solidified the Black Sheep Squadron as one of the most memorable and celebrated units of the Pacific War. Ultimately, WWII 214's story is inseparable from Boyington's vision, personality, and leadership. The squadron's 22 victories, achieved under his guidance, were emblematic of a philosophy that prized initiative, courage, and the strategic application of talent, transforming a collection of disparate pilots into a legendary fighting force. Boyington's impact extended beyond statistics. He forged a unit identity, cultivated morale, and established operational practices that allowed his men to excel under extraordinary pressure. The Black Sheep Squadron stands as a testament to the power of leadership that blends skill, daring, and the capacity to inspire, illustrating how one individual's vision can shape not only immediate tactical outcomes but also enduring historical legacy. Through this remarkable chapter, the complexity of Gregory Pappy Boyington, his brilliance, flaws, and unyielding determination shines in full relief, leaving an indelible mark on the history of aviation and the story of the Pacific Theater. By the time Gregory Pappy Boyington's tenure with the Black Sheep Squadron reached its zenith, his record of aerial victories had become a subject of both admiration and intense debate, a reflection of the complicated tapestry that defined his career and the broader context of World War II aviation. With 22 confirmed kills credited to him while leading WWII 214, and an additional 3.5 victories officially recognized from his time with the American Volunteer Group, Boyington's cumulative score reached an impressive total of 25.5 aerial victories. On paper, this figure seemed to cement his status as one of the most accomplished Marine Corps fighter aces of the war. Yet when measured against the official record of Joseph Foss, who achieved 26 confirmed kills, questions of precedence, accuracy, and recognition began to emerge, highlighting both the challenges of wartime documentation and the complexities inherent in constructing legacies in high-stakes combat environments. The numerical closeness of Boyington's tally to Foss' record created fertile ground for debate among historians, military analysts, and veterans themselves, as it juxtaposed two contrasting narratives of heroism, skill, and leadership. Foss' achievements were grounded in meticulously verified accounts, substantiated by multiple sources and mission reports, leaving little room for dispute regarding the scope of his combat success. Boyington's record, while undeniably impressive, was complicated by inconsistencies in the documentation of his early victories with the AVG and by the public perception of his flamboyant, often unpredictable personality, which had colored the way both contemporaries and later historians interpreted his exploits. The question of whether Boyington should be considered the top Marine ace became more than a tally of enemy aircraft destroyed. It became a conversation about how courage, skill, and leadership intersect with documentation, interpretation, and memory in shaping historical recognition. Beyond the arithmetic of confirmed kills, the narrative surrounding Boyington's combined victories illuminates the broader context of aerial warfare in the Pacific and the role of individual pilots in influencing outcomes far beyond their personal tallies. Each confirmed or claimed victory represented not only a tactical success in the air, but also a symbolic moment of morale, both for the pilot and for the units and populations relying on their efforts. Boyington's 25.5 credited victories underscored his impact on strategic operations, his ability to inspire his squadron, and the psychological effect his presence had on both allies and adversaries. In this sense, the number itself, while subject to scrutiny, serves as a lens through which to examine the intersection of skill, opportunity, and leadership, revealing how individual initiative could amplify collective effectiveness in the chaos of war. The comparison to Jose also emphasizes the subjective dimensions of heroism and the ways in which personality, narrative, and historical record converge to shape public perception. Foss, known for his steady temperament, tactical precision, and adherence to protocol, contrasted sharply with Boyington's more mercurial nature, propensity for risk-taking, and sometimes controversial behavior. These differences created a tension between the metrics of achievement and the qualities perceived as heroic or exemplary, prompting questions about how recognition should be measured: by numbers alone, by personal bravery, by leadership, or by the capacity to inspire and transform a unit. Boyington's combined victories, then, were both an affirmation of his skill and a reminder of the complex human factors that underlie any historical evaluation of excellence in combat. Moreover, the narrative surrounding 25.5 victories illuminates the interplay between official records, personal claims, and popular culture in shaping legacy. Boyington's exploits were celebrated in newspapers, wartime propaganda, and later in television dramatizations that amplified his daring persona and cemented his legend in the public imagination. This cultural reinforcement of his image often overshadowed the nuanced reality of record verification, fueling both admiration and skepticism. Veterans who had flown alongside him, particularly those aware of discrepancies in AG records, sometimes viewed these victories with ambivalence, recognizing both his undeniable skill and the embellishments that tended to accompany his storytelling. The tension between myth and fact, between celebrated narrative and empirical record, reflects the broader dynamics of how war heroes are remembered, particularly in cases where personality and performance intertwine in ways that defy simple classification. The strategic significance of Boyington's combined victories also highlights his role as a tactical innovator and morale booster. Each engagement, whether contributing to his 3.5 AV kills or his 22 Black Sheep victories, demonstrated his ability to read combat situations, anticipate enemy maneuvers, and execute high-risk, high-reward strategies that leveraged both his personal skills and the strengths of his squadron. These successes enhanced the operational effectiveness of the units he led and contributed materially to the broader objectives of the Marine Corps and Allied forces in the Pacific, underscoring the practical import of his achievements beyond the numerical tally. In this context, the debate over the exact count of victories becomes less a question of ego or personal record and more a window into the interplay of leadership, strategy, and individual agency in determining outcomes on a vast and complex battlefield. Ultimately, the story of Gregory Boyington's 25.5 combined victories is inseparable from his identity as both a fighter and a leader, a man whose skill and audacity elevated him to legendary status even as disputes over records and personality nuances complicated his legacy. His proximity to Joe Foss's record invites reflection not only on the technicalities of aerial victory claims but also on the qualities that define heroism, the challenges of historical documentation, and the role of narrative in shaping collective memory. Boyington's record, whether viewed as definitive or contested, exemplifies the intricate dynamics of wartime achievement, revealing a portrait of a man whose contributions were as consequential as they were complex, whose victories shaped the course of the Pacific Air War, and whose legend continues to inspire discussion, admiration, and critical analysis in the decades that followed. Through this lens, the 25.5 victories are more than numbers, they are markers of courage, leadership, and the enduring enigma of Gregory "Pappy" Boyington. By early January 1940, Gregory "Pappy" Boyington's staring exploits in the Pacific had reached a point where the risks he routinely embraced finally caught up with him, resulting in a dramatic turn of events that would test his character in ways no aerial dogfight ever could. On a mission over the heavily fortified Japanese stronghold of Rabaul, Boyington's luck faltered, and he was shot down, plunging him into the grim reality of being a prisoner of war under the Japanese. What followed would be 16 months of confinement, a period that exposed the stark contrasts between his celebrated persona as a fighter ace and the morally complex choices he made when faced with the deprivation, hierarchy, and camaraderie or lack thereof within the POW camps. While many might have assumed that a man of his reputation and skill would inspire solidarity and mutual support, the circumstances revealed a more complicated and controversial dimension of his character, one that would shape how he was remembered by those who endured captivity alongside him. Upon his capture, Boyington was transported through a series of Japanese detention facilities, ultimately ending up in camps where scarcity, malnutrition, and the daily threat of illness and death defined the existence of every prisoner. It was in these harrowing conditions that the contrast between Boyington and his fellow POWs became painfully evident. While many men risked life and limb to scavenge vegetables, steal rice, or negotiate for extra rations to support those too weak to stand, Boyington found himself in a unique and enviable position. he was assigned to work in the Japanese officer's kitchen, an assignment that provided him with access to food and relative comfort that was unavailable to the majority of prisoners. Unlike his fellow captives, who subsisted on meager portions and endured the slow erosion of strength and morale, Boyington's status allowed him to gain weight and maintain his physical health, a situation that, rather than being leveraged to aid others, became a source of mounting tension within the camp. The resentment toward Boyington was not incidental or superficial. It was rooted in repeated refusals to share or redistribute the resources he could access. Even when approached by senior prisoners who implored him to help the weaker men, multiple appeals were made, each emphasizing the moral and practical imperative of using his privileged position to benefit the collective. But Boyington declined, citing risk and a desire to preserve his own advantage. While this behavior can be interpreted in various ways: self-preservation, pragmatism, or perhaps an ingrained sense of individualism, it had the immediate effect of alienating him from his peers, creating a climate of distrust and contempt that would linger long after their release. In a community where survival often depended on cooperation and mutual support, Boyington's refusal to participate in collective welfare marked him as an outlier, one whose heroics in the air did not translate into moral leadership on the ground. The irony of Boyington's situation was profound. At the very moment when the United States celebrated his exploits as a fighter ace and a leader of the Black Sheep Squadron, he was perceived by those closest to him in captivity as self-serving and untrustworthy. The contrast between public adulation and private disdain underscored the complexities of character and reputation, revealing that courage in battle did not automatically confer ethical authority or social cohesion in environments where survival required both ingenuity and empathy. Reports from fellow POWs, including notable figures such as Frederick DeWitt Turnbull, document the frustration and disappointment that accompanied Boyington's choices, highlighting how his access to food and comfort, rather than being a means of communal support, became a source of moral tension and interpersonal conflict. This period in captivity also serves as a lens through which to examine the broader challenges of leadership, character, and human behavior under extreme conditions. Boyington's prior reputation as a daring, audacious pilot and a sometimes volatile leader now intersected with the stark realities of imprisonment, forcing a re-evaluation of the qualities that had made him celebrated in the air but contentious in confinement. His actions or inactions highlight the sometimes uncomfortable divergence between skill-based heroism and moral responsibility, revealing that a man capable of orchestrating victories in complex combat scenarios was not necessarily adept at navigating the social and ethical dimensions of shared suffering. The resentment he engendered among his fellow prisoners was not merely a reflection of envy or personality conflict. It was rooted in tangible consequences, as his refusal to share food could have affected the survival prospects of men weakened by starvation and disease. Over time, the dynamics of the camp solidified, with Boyington's position as a privileged yet isolated figure both shielding him from immediate danger and simultaneously marginalizing him socially. The paradox was acute. His tactical acumen, bravery, and skill had earned him fame and recognition. Yet those very qualities did not translate into moral authority or social cohesion in the confined, high-stakes environment of a Japanese POW camp. Accounts suggest that, by the end of his captivity, Boyington had few allies remaining among the prisoners, and the lingering resentment colored interactions in subtle and overt ways. This dissonance between celebrated hero and socially isolated figure illuminates the complex interplay between competence, personality, and ethical choice, illustrating that historical legacies are rarely straightforward, particularly in the context of war. Boyington's 16 months as a POW in Japan, marked by his refusal to share extra rations, thus stands as a controversial and instructive episode in his life. It exposes the tensions between survival and solidarity, individual advantage and collective responsibility, and the often ambiguous terrain where heroism and ethical conduct intersect. While his aerial victories and leadership of the Black Sheep Squadron earned him enduring fame and accolades, his behavior in captivity introduces a counterpoint that complicates the narrative, reminding us that valor in one domain does not automatically confer moral authority in another. In examining this period, historians and enthusiasts alike are prompted to grapple with the contradictions inherent in human behavior, recognizing that Boyington's legacy is not a simple tale of triumph but a nuanced story of skill, audacity, and moral ambiguity, a chapter that challenges assumptions and deepens understanding of the man behind the legend. After the war, Gregory Pappy Boyington returned to a world that had both celebrated and scrutinized him, a landscape in which his exploits in the skies were remembered with admiration by some yet tempered by the controversies that had long shadowed his personality and conduct, while his name had become synonymous with daring feats, audacious leadership, and the legendary Black Sheep Squadron. The post-war years revealed that heroism in battle did not automatically translate to universal respect or unchallenged admiration among peers. Boyington remained a polarizing figure, someone whose charisma, skill, and tactical brilliance were offset by tendencies toward drinking, aggression, and behavior perceived as self-serving, a juxtaposition that made his legacy simultaneously inspiring and contentious. In social and military circles, Boyington's reputation as a leader of men was often acknowledged with genuine admiration. Those who had flown under his command, particularly in the Black Sheep Squadron, recalled his ability to motivate and inspire through both example and audacity, demonstrating a rare combination of tactical genius and personal courage that could galvanize a diverse group of pilots into a cohesive, high-performing unit. These qualities, coupled with his penchant for bold, high-stakes maneuvers in combat, cemented his status as an extraordinary aviator whose leadership contributed materially to the success of his missions and the morale of his squadron. The admiration he commanded in these contexts was often heartfelt, grounded in first-hand experience of his ability to guide, protect, and achieve results in extraordinarily dangerous circumstances, a testament to the practical impact of his skills on those who depended on him for survival and guidance. Yet this admiration coexisted uneasily with criticism from those who had observed, endured, or been affected by the less savory aspects of Boyington's personality. His tendency to drink excessively, a habit that had complicated his career in both the Flying Tigers and the Marine Corps, remained a source of tension and concern. Incidents of aggression, whether verbal confrontations, physical altercations, or reckless behavior in social settings fueled perceptions that Boyington was unpredictable and difficult to manage, traits that clashed with the discipline-oriented culture of the military and the decorum expected of decorated veterans. Moreover, anecdotes from post-war gatherings, reunions, and interactions with fellow Medal of Honor recipients illustrate that his self-serving behavior, a continuation of patterns observed during captivity and combat, could alienate colleagues and diminish the goodwill generated by his heroics, complicating the narrative of his public image and influencing how contemporaries remembered him. This duality of admiration and critique underscores a broader theme in the study of military personalities: the tension between operational excellence and personal comportment, between public legend and private behavior. Boyington's post-war life exemplifies how achievements in one domain, particularly one as visible and valorized as aerial combat, can coexist with behaviors that undermine social bonds, professional respect, and ethical evaluations in other domains. The dichotomy between the heroic leader who inspired his squadron to victories in the Pacific and the controversial, sometimes abrasive figure at social and professional gatherings creates a rich, if challenging, portrait of a man whose complexity resists simple categorization. This tension invites a deeper examination of what constitutes leadership, heroism, and moral authority. particularly in contexts where courage and audacity are celebrated but interpersonal judgment and restraint are also valued. Observers and fellow veterans often recounted episodes that highlighted this duality. In social settings where alcohol was involved, Boyington's charisma and humor could quickly give way to confrontation or reckless antics, leading to strained relationships. In some cases, public embarrassment. His interactions with peers such as Joe Foss and other decorated aviators were colored by both respect for his accomplishments and wariness regarding his impulsive tendencies, a mixture that reinforced his reputation as a figure both magnetic and problematic. These dynamics illustrate the ways in which individual personality traits amplified by fame, stress, and the lingering effects of war can shape post-conflict reputations, sometimes overshadowing even the most extraordinary professional achievements. Critics often pointed to Boyington's self-interest during his time as a prisoner of war as a formative example of a behavioral pattern that continued into his post-war life. The decisions he made in captivity, prioritizing his own survival and comfort over the needs of his fellow prisoners, were remembered and cited as evidence that, despite his skill and bravery, Boyington's character could lean toward opportunism and self-preservation. These actions, when juxtaposed with his celebrated aerial victories and Medal of Honor recognition, created a moral and psychological tension that followed him into the civilian world, shaping both personal interactions and public narratives. The result was a post-war persona that was complex, contradictory, and deeply human, a man capable of inspiring loyalty and admiration in some contexts, while simultaneously provoking frustration, resentment, and skepticism in others. Despite these controversies, Boyington's post-war legacy endured, a testament to the lasting impact of his contributions as a pilot and leader. His story offers a nuanced reflection on the nature of heroism, revealing that recognition and fame are rarely solely determined by skill or accomplishment. Rather, they are shaped by a complex interplay of personal conduct, public perception, and the narratives constructed by those who witness, document, and remember extraordinary deeds. The admiration he received for his leadership in combat coexisted with criticism for his drinking, aggression, and self-serving behavior, producing a layered, multi-dimensional legacy that challenges simplistic interpretations and invites continued exploration and debate. In examining Boyington's post-war life, it becomes evident that the traits that allowed him to achieve extraordinary feats, courage, audacity, tactical ingenuity, also contributed to conflicts and misunderstandings that complicated his relationships and reputation. The polarizing nature of his character provides insight into the human complexities behind the veneer of heroism, reminding audiences that individuals who accomplish remarkable things can also embody flaws, contradictions, and behaviors that provoke both admiration and criticism. Gregory Pappy Boyington's post-war persona, celebrated by some and critiqued by others, thus stands as a compelling case study in the interplay between talent, personality, and legacy, illustrating how the contours of human behavior continue to shape the perception of historical figures long after the battles have ended. Gregory P. Boyington's life, when considered in its entirety, presents a tapestry of daring, controversy, and remarkable achievement, a story that defies easy categorization and illustrates the complex interplay between heroism, personal flaws, and historical memory, despite a career marked by behavior that often provoked frustration, skepticism, and outright disdain among peers. His courage in combat and extraordinary skill as a fighter-pilot earned him recognition that few could ever hope to achieve, culminating in his being awarded the United States' highest military honors, the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross, distinctions that immortalized his contributions to World War II while simultaneously drawing attention to the contradictions that defined his life and legacy. Boyington's journey toward these accolades was neither linear nor unblemished, as the same audacity and determination that propelled him to aerial victories also manifested in patterns of behavior that challenged authority. Social cohesion and the expectations of those around him. From his early days in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, where he nurtured a fascination with flight, through his combative youth and tempestuous time with the Flying Tigers, and culminating in his leadership of the Black Sheep Squadron, Boyington consistently demonstrated an irrepressible drive to assert his individuality and embrace high-risk situations. These traits, while contributing to his effectiveness in combat, also created tensions that persisted throughout his career, particularly in interactions with fellow pilots, commanding officers, and, later, peers in post-war gatherings. Yet, despite these personal flaws, Boyington's achievements in the sky could not be denied, and the valor he exhibited under fire served as the foundation for the formal recognition that would define his public legacy. The Medal of Honor, awarded for acts of conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty, and the Navy Cross, granted for extraordinary heroism in combat, reflect the tangible impact of Boyington's contributions during some of the most intense and dangerous aerial campaigns of World War II. These awards were not mere ceremonial acknowledgments. They were endorsements of a pattern of exceptional performance, leadership, and bravery, validated by rigorous military standards and corroborated by accounts of his missions and victories. While contemporaries and historians have debated the precise tally of his confirmed aerial kills, the recognition he received underscores a broader truth. Boyington possessed an extraordinary ability to navigate the chaos of aerial combat, inspire those under his command, and accomplish objectives that required both tactical intelligence and extraordinary courage. What makes Boyington's story particularly compelling is the tension between these formal recognitions and the less flattering aspects of his character, which continue to influence how he was perceived by peers, subordinates, and the public. His propensity for alcohol, occasional aggression, self-preservation, and controversial choices, most notably during his time as a prisoner of war, paint a portrait of a man whose human imperfections were as pronounced as his exceptional talents. Yet rather than diminishing the significance of his awards or the heroism they represented, these flaws provide context, illustrating that acts of bravery and leadership often exist alongside human complexity, and that historical figures can embody both exemplary and problematic traits without negating the impact of their accomplishments. In reflecting on Boyington's legacy, it becomes evident that recognition of valor does not demand perfection, nor does the presence of personal flaws invalidate the courage and skill that earned him a place among the most celebrated fighter pilots in American history. His story invites viewers to grapple with the dualities inherent in human character, the coexistence of audacity and recklessness, courage and controversy, leadership and interpersonal conflict. Boyington's life exemplifies how individuals can inspire, achieve, and leave an enduring mark on history while simultaneously confronting, embodying, and sometimes succumbing to their own limitations, making his journey both instructive and resonant for those who seek to understand the complexities of heroism. Moreover, Boyington's enduring fame, bolstered by television portrayals and popular media, serves as a reminder of the ways in which public perception and historical documentation can both elevate and complicate a person's legacy. The Black Sheep Squadron, immortalized in popular culture, highlighted his daring exploits, leadership, and tactical ingenuity, reinforcing the public's fascination with his life, while sometimes glossing over or dramatizing the more controversial aspects of his personality. Yet for those who study the historical record, including first-hand accounts from fellow pilots and prisoners of war, The interplay of courage and controversy provides a richer, more nuanced understanding of the man behind the legend, challenging audiences to reconcile admiration with critical reflection. Ultimately, the recognition Boyington received through the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross ensures that his contributions to World War II remain indelibly etched into military history, a testament to acts of bravery that transcended ordinary expectation and risk. These awards serve not only as symbols of personal valor, but also as markers of the broader impact of his leadership, strategic acumen, and daring in combat. Simultaneously, the stories of his human flaws, contentious relationships, and morally ambiguous decisions enrich the narrative, reminding audiences that historical heroes are rarely, if ever, unblemished, and that the qualities which enable extraordinary achievement often coexist with imperfections that challenge, provoke, and complicate understanding. In examining Gregory Pappy Boyington's life through the lens of both his honors and his flaws, we gain insight into the multifaceted nature of heroism, the realities of leadership in extreme circumstances, and the enduring tension between public adulation and private critique. His story encourages reflection on what it truly means to be courageous, the ethical dimensions of leadership, and the ways in which personal character shapes historical legacy, for all the complexities, contradictions, and controversies. Boyington's bravery remains undeniable, ensuring that, despite personal shortcomings, he will be remembered as a figure who embodied daring, skill, and the extraordinary risks inherent in the pursuit of victory during one of history's most tumultuous periods. As we draw the story of Gregory Pappy Boyington to a close, we find ourselves confronted with a man whose life defies simple labels, a figure simultaneously celebrated and criticized, whose legend in the skies continues to captivate historians, military enthusiasts, and fans of history alike. Boyington's journey through the turbulence of World War II, from his early fascination with flight in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, to his daring exploits with the Flying Tigers, and later as the commander of the Black Sheep Squadron, presents a portrait of a man whose courage, skill, and audacity in aerial combat were extraordinary, yet whose personality, habits, and decisions often provoke controversy and debate among those who knew him intimately. He is remembered as a brilliant and fearless pilot, a leader capable of inspiring men to perform feats that, under ordinary circumstances, might have seemed impossible. His formation of WWII 214 and the remarkable victories achieved under his command illustrate not only tactical intelligence and sharp reflexes in the cockpit, but also an ability to unite a diverse group of aviators into a cohesive and formidable fighting unit. These accomplishments are made even more impressive when we consider the broader context of wartime pressures, logistical challenges, and the constant threat of death that pilots faced in the Pacific theater. Boyington's exploits, coupled with the daring reputation he earned as the Black Sheep of the Marines, cemented his place in history and earned him both the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross, affirming the impact and bravery of his actions even as the nuances of his character complicated his legacy. Yet, alongside this heroism, Boyington's flaws, his impulsiveness, bouts of heavy drinking, tendency toward aggression, and sometimes self-serving decisions cannot be ignored. Fellow pilots, comrades, and even those who admired him from afar often noted that while he was a man of exceptional skill and courage, his behavior could strain relationships, sow tension, and provoke frustration. The controversies surrounding his time as a prisoner of war, particularly his refusal to share extra rations with fellow captives, and the embellishments he sometimes made regarding his aerial victories, underscore the complexity of his persona. These actions, while not diminishing the technical brilliance he displayed in the air, contribute to a multifaceted view of Boyington as a human being. Brilliant, flawed, compelling, and at times difficult to fully embrace or forgive. This duality between heroism and imperfection, admiration and critique is perhaps what makes Boyington such a fascinating figure in history. His story challenges us to consider the nature of courage, the responsibilities of leadership, and the ways in which personal choices influence legacy. It invites reflection on the reality that extraordinary achievements do not require perfection, and that individuals who accomplish remarkable feats often do so in tandem with deeply human tendencies toward error, indulgence, or self-interest. In Boyington's case, the accolades he received were earned through undeniable skill and bravery. Yet the controversies and criticisms that followed illustrate that heroism is rarely a pure, uncomplicated quality, but rather a mixture of daring, talent, and the realities of human nature. The debates over Boyington's character and the exact number of his aerial victories serve as a reminder of how historical memory is constructed, contested, and continually reassessed. Some see him as a larger-than-life hero, a leader whose tactical genius and fearless nature defined his squadron and inspired generations of aviators, while others view him as a figure whose personal shortcomings and embellishments warrant caution in placing him on an unqualified pedestal. This tension between admiration and skepticism encourages a nuanced understanding of history, emphasizing that the people who populate it are complex, layered, and often contradictory. Boyington's life, like that of many historical figures, is a study in paradox, a man capable of extraordinary courage and equally capable of choices that alienated and frustrated those around him. As we reflect on the life and legacy of Gregory "Pappy" Boyington, we are invited not only to celebrate his contributions to aviation and military history, but also to learn from the complexities of his character. His story demonstrates that heroism can coexist with human imperfection, that extraordinary accomplishments can emerge alongside controversial behavior, and that the true measure of legacy is often found in the intersection of skill, courage, and the lasting impressions left on those who witness, serve with, or study an individual. Boyington's life reminds us that history is rarely black and white. It is composed of individuals whose brilliance and flaws are intertwined, creating narratives that are as compelling and instructive as they are multifaceted. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the remarkable and sometimes controversial life of Gregory "Pappy" Boyington. If you enjoyed this exploration of history, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our future deep dives into fascinating historical figures and events. Your support helps us continue sharing these stories with a wider audience, keeping the past alive and thought-provoking for viewers like you. We hope this story has not only entertained you, but also offered insight into the complex human dimensions of heroism, leadership, and the choices that define a life. From daring aerial victories to controversial decisions, Gregory Boyington's story is a reminder that history is shaped by both extraordinary achievements and human contradictions. And with that, we wish you a peaceful and restful night. May your dreams soar as high and boldly as the legendary Black Sheep Squadron, and may you awaken inspired by stories of courage, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit. Good night.